r/NoSleep. Posted by u/lifeisstrangemetoo. His wife died on a Monday. She died again on Tuesday. You have to understand that I didn't mean to kill her. Okay? I don't even remember doing it, not really. One moment we were screaming at each other, and when she slapped me my brain just stopped. The next thing I know she was on the floor, and there was blood everywhere from where the back of her head had caved in. Of course I was distraught. Who wouldn't be? My wife was dead. But there's no sense crying over spilt milk, right? And I'm a pragmatist. So I had to get rid of the body. I didn't want to chop her up. But under the circumstances I had no other choice. You can see that, right? And obviously I was shaking, too upset to relax, but well, have you ever considered how physically exhausting it is to kill someone? Never mind chopping them up. It's only natural that I fell asleep. That doesn't mean I'm a psychopath. But Lauren, of course Lauren could never let anything go. I should have known not even death would stop her from tormenting me. I shouldn't have been surprised that when I woke up she was still there, giving me that damn judgmental stare she learned from her mother. I should have known she'd stitch her limbs back together. God, she looked horrendous, the way her skin had bloated and changed color, those awful, crooked seams that barely held her together. That's why death is supposed to be permanent. Once you're dead you stay that way. Those are the rules. But not Lauren, no, of course not Lauren. I apologized to her, but do you think that made her happy? She wouldn't even speak to me, she just kept on giving me that look. I had to call in sick for work that day. She just kept following me everywhere I went. But that's typical. She's always resented me for working late. Never mind the fact that she hasn't worked for the better part of a decade because of her swollen joints. No one has swollen joints at 33, Lauren, but don't try to tell her that. And I wanted to just let it be, you know? Bygones and all that shit. But she wouldn't let me. She wouldn't let me sleep, wouldn't let me eat, wouldn't let me leave the damn house. Which I paid for by the way. Every time I tried she just changed. She was trying to eat my soul, I know it, the way she stretched her mouth wide open until it covered half her head and screamed, God that awful scream. Did you know that rabbits scream? A long time ago, when I was just a kid, I had this pet rabbit. Well, to make a long story short my dad came home drunk one night and grabbed it by the legs and just smashed it against the wall, over and over again until it died. And God it screamed the whole time, a horrible sound like you wouldn't believe. And with my dad drunk as he was, it took a very, very long time to die. That's what Lauren sounded like. A scared little rabbit being smashed against the wall. So I had no choice, I had to kill her again. This time I had to make sure, you know? That's why I had to use the gun. I don't know how she put all her pieces back together, but I knew that if I turned her to ground beef with a shotgun she wouldn't get back up. I guess that's what got me caught, the noise. But I don't care, I'm happy in here. They give me pills that stop the screaming in my head. A couple of hours of quiet is better than nothing, right? I'm sorry, what was your question again? I took a deep breath. I think you've answered everything I needed to ask, I said. Did they tell you why I'm here? Mr. Miller scratched his neck. His eyes went vacant for a moment, and just when I thought he wouldn't answer, he did. You're the appeals shrink, he said. Yes, I replied. I'm the appeals shrink. I didn't lodge an appeal, said Mr. Miller. Your brother and your lawyer have decided to launch one on your behalf. Why? He said. What's the point? I'm guilty, and everybody knows it. It's not about guilt. Then what is it about? I took another deep breath, paused for a moment in preparation for what I was about to say. It's about whether you are mentally fit enough to be executed, I replied. Oh, said Mr. Miller. There was a long pause. I studied Mr. Miller's face as his eyes drifted off into thoughtfulness. After what seemed like hours, but must have only been minutes, he spoke. So what do you think? He asked. Am I crazy? I looked down at the case notes in my lap. Even before talking to Mr. Miller I was fairly certain of my conclusion. No sane man could have done what he had done. Killing his wife was one thing, chopping her up another. But sewing the pieces back together, rigging the ceiling with ropes and pulleys and dragging her along like a marionette for 3 days? An act of such depravity could only be the product of a diseased mind. Now that I'd interviewed him I was sure there was no way he was mentally fit for execution. Still, there was something bothering me. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and rested my cheek against my fist. Mr. Miller? I asked. Yeah? That story you told me about your rabbit. Can I ask you a question about it? He shrugged. Okay, sure, he said. If you could have taken it from your dad and put it out of its misery, would you have? What do you mean? If you knew you could stop its pain even if it meant killing it, would you have done it? He thought for a moment, and I thought I saw understanding dawn on his face. Though, in retrospect, perhaps that was just what I wanted to see. Yeah, he said, I would have. I would have done anything to stop those screams. He paused. So where does that leave us, Doc? Am I crazy? I marked my recommendation down in my notes. No, I said. You're not crazy. Your execution will proceed as scheduled. He smiled a little, a tired, hollow smile. Good, he said. Good. The next story of this video. Posted by you/lifeisstrangemetoo. Don't let strangers take your picture. The conversation was normal, until one of the speakers suffered a sudden and violent death. It began when a young, fresh-faced youth with an old-fashioned camera draped around his neck approached a young woman sitting on a park bench. "Excuse me, miss," he began tentatively. She looked up from her phone, and brushed a lock of blonde hair out of her green eyes. "Yes?" she said, masking her mild annoyance with a smile. "I'm doing a photography project for my school," he said, "and I was wondering if I could photograph you." "Oh," she said. The request seemed to puzzle yet flatter her. She thought for a moment and then said, "Sure." "Great," said the young man, smiling. "Over there by that tree would be best." The woman gladly obliged, and the two strode over to the tree together, where the woman posed, somewhat awkwardly, with a smile that was almost genuine. "Actually," the young man said, "would you mind moving over a couple feet to the left?" "Just here?" the woman asked, shuffling over a couple feet. "Just a bit more," he said. She moved over a few more inches and smiled. Two things happened at once: the camera flashed, and the young woman's head exploded into a bloody pulp. Suddenly, the world's volume was turned down. My heart pounded in my ears. The woman's body went limp and sank to the grass, spilling blood from her neck in a torrential fountain. The bystanders screamed, and my hands fumbled for my phone to dial 911. My hands were shaking badly, and I almost dropped the phone into the grass. After I dialed, I held the ringing phone to my ear and looked up. The young man was nowhere to be seen. I wondered where he had gone, but the thought was driven from my head as 911 operator picked up. 911, said the woman's voice. "What is your emergency?" But I could not answer. Something was severely wrong with me. There didn't seem to be enough air in my lungs, and my hands started to feel cold and numb. I was dizzy now. The world span and the ground rose up to meet my face, smashing my nose painfully. My vision began to swim in darkness, and then there was nothing. When the EMTs revived me, the woman's body had already been packed into the ambulance and taken away, though the bloodstain remained, a dark stain of brown against the green of the grass. The EMTs said I'd had a panic attack and passed out. The police took my statement and they sent me home, numb with shock. A few weeks later I found out that the woman had been hit by a stray bullet from someone shooting cans in their backyard a mile away. It was a 1 in a million shot, they said. A week later, I saw the young man again. He wore the exact same clothes, had the exact same haircut and cheerful grin, and the same old-fashioned camera was draped around his neck. I saw him by chance through the window of a restaurant, chatting up an elderly couple who sat in a corner booth. The silent, smiling conversation did not last long before the young man convinced them to get up and move to another booth. He lifted his camera to his face and nothing happened. The old woman smiled and cocked her head to the side, as if she was asking him something. He smiled back and raised a finger, before lifting the camera to his face again. There was a sound like roaring thunder, and the wall of the restaurant exploded into dust and debris. A truck had crashed through the wall and demolished the old couple's booth. The young man stood there as if nothing had happened. He raised the camera to his face, took one more picture, and then turned to leave. He pushed the door to the restaurant open and walked out. He stopped and scanned the street. His gaze halted on me. The screaming and the chaos faded into silence as his preternaturally blue eyes bored into mine, turning my insides to ice. And then, in a moment, he was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I hoped after that to never see him again. But fate did not care much about my hopes. It never does. I was having dinner with my wife and 5-year-old daughter, Sarah, and the air was filled with laughter and the smell of my wife's baked pork chops and creamed mushrooms. Sarah was telling us a story about a strange man she'd met by the school who had offered to take her picture. She said he had a strange smile and a really old camera like she had never seen before. My heart sat up and began to beat against the inside of my chest. Trying to maintain the illusion of calm, I set my fork down gently on my plate, and I told her that if she ever saw that man again she was to run. And that she absolutely, under no circumstances, was she allowed to let him take her picture. "But he did take my picture, Dad," said Sarah. "He wouldn't let me see it, but he said he'd come show me when it was ready in a week." "What?" I gasped. My voice was hoarse and small. My wife was looking between my Sarah and I with a look of concerned confusion. Sarah seemed to sense that something was wrong, and her chin began to quiver. "Nothing is wrong, honey," I said. "Everything is going to be okay." The lie struggled out of my throat, and the guilt of it seized my heart and squeezed it tight. Sarah's eyes were watery, but she continued what she was saying. "He said something else, too, Dad," she said uncertainly. "He said it was very important." "Yes?" "He said he wouldn't develop my picture, if you'd let him take yours. In the park tomorrow at noon." A wave of relief intermingled with sadness washed over me, and a tension I hadn't even noticed dissolved from my shoulders. I could feel the tears standing out in my eyes as I kissed my daughter's head, taking in a huge whiff of her scent, that scent of pure youth that makes the old feel young again. I kissed my wife hard on the lips, savoring the taste, half lipstick and half the pork chops she had just eaten. "I love you, Janine," I said. "And I love you too, Sarah." They looked at me uncomprehendingly, concerned, as if I had lost my mind. I've always loved my family more than life itself, and tomorrow at noon, I guess I will have to prove it. Perhaps I can get the better of the stranger, perhaps not. Wish me luck.